Hey folks, welcome to another Triple T Thursday. For those of you just joining us, that's Tools, Tips, and Talk, where I kind of riff with the camera, talk about some things on my mind, talk about some tools, and give you some good tips. Today's episode is going to be a bit of a continuation from last week, where we talked about etching your blade with ferric chloride. In this episode, we're going to talk about stone washing or stone tumbling your knife. So let's talk about that. The other thing we're going to cover is etching your maker's mark in the blade. That's electro etching your maker's mark. So we're going to talk all about that process in today's video as well. So let's go down to the table and I'll show you the rock tumbler. So this is our rock tumbler. It's really simple. It's just a piece of PVC pipe. I think this is a 4-inch piece. I got 2 end caps here and then my tumbling media. You're actually probably better off with some sharper edge tumbling media. You can actually buy specific tumbling media off the internet, and a bunch of places have like they're triangles, have little sharp corners, but this works out just fine, and obviously it's much cheaper. It's just some stones. They're shiny because I sprayed some WD-40 on them, and you can see I've got probably a couple of pounds of them in there. All you do is take your blade, pop it in there, put the cap on. The low-tech version is shaking this by hand for 5 or 10 minutes, which works just fine. There's some other options, of course. Let's go over to the 2x72 and I'll show you the first option. So this is a little sled that I made that just clamps onto my 2x72. You can see I just went and bought some casters, screwed them down to this piece of wood, and then this thing just sits on top. This used to be a bit longer here, but I cut it down and I'll tell you why in a minute. But this is just tooling for a tool chest. This is the stuff on the bottom, and I just use this because it's a little more grippy than just the PVC, and the belts would grip onto this. And then as your 2x72 turns, it's just going to spin your rock tumbler. Real low tech, but works great. So the reason I cut this down was so that it would actually fit in my lathe, and I don't really do a lot of really long knives. What I did was put some bolts through the caps at either end. In one of the bolts, this one, I used a center drill and put a little nipple in there, a little indent, so that I could use my tailstock. So let's just mount it in the lathe here. Just tighten the chuck. There. You would put your blade in with the media, turn this on. I'm going to turn it on. It's going to be kind of loud. That's all there is to it. So either shake it, use it on your 2x72. If you got a lathe, put it in here. So the method really is acid etch your blade in ferric chloride until it's really black. You could even use coffee as well if you wanted to do coffee afterwards. After that, neutralize it with baking soda or Windex, pop it in here, and then just roll it, and you'll get a beautiful, nice stonewash finish. Unfortunately, I don't have a knife that I've stonewashed to show you guys what that looks like. Google it on the internet, stonewashed knife, and you will see what the stone finish looks like. I really like it. I think it looks really cool. Okay, I'm ready to etch this blade, so let's go through the etching process. And when I mean etching my maker's mark on here. So this is going to be electro etching. So the very first thing I like to do is use some acetone and clean off the blade here. So that's just some of this stuff. And that'll get all the grease and anything off the blade. Let's talk about placement of your maker's mark. Typically, I like to put the maker's mark on the left side of the blade because someone who's right-handed will pick it up and they'll see the maker's mark. Most people, I think, put them on the right side, but it's really up to you, whichever side you want to put it on. Some people put it on the ricasso. I have a pretty big maker's mark, so it usually goes on the blade, and I usually put it right there. So let's talk about where to get maker's marks. I get mine from It's a little dirty. IMG marking group. This is the only ones I've ever bought. Meaning I literally have only ever ordered them once. These things are reusable. You can use each one of these like 5 or 10 times. And you can't quite see it, but there's like a little mesh in between the plastic. So they work really well. And you get about, for 50 bucks or 60 bucks, you get about, 18 of these or something like that. So they last a really long time. You just send them an image of what you want and tell them the size, and they'll resize it for you. So I position it where I want it on the blade, and I'll usually get a piece of masking tape and just mask off the sides. So I want it right. Let's get that out of the way. You only get one shot at this, so make sure it is where you want it. And one thing is you want to make sure it's flat. So I try to mask it down so that it stays flat. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat, but it will kind of stick to the blade once you start. So let's talk about what to use for your etching. You can see I just use a battery charger. A 5010 2 amp battery charger. I always set it at 10 amp for this process. These work great. Honestly, you do not need to go out and spend $200 on a special electro etching machine with a special solution. In my opinion, you just don't need to. It's kind of a waste of money in my opinion. This is water. Usually you want it about a tablespoon to about a quarter cup. This is just a little less of each, so just 'cause you don't really need much. So whatever the proportions are for that. For the leads, so you want to hook the positive to your blade. Okay, remember that. The positive to the blade, the negative is where you're going to put your cotton ball or whatever it is you're going to use. I take a cotton ball like this and I just kind of fold it into itself and then clip this so it's kind of puffed out at the end. And there's tons of ways to make these, but this works for me, so that's what I use. So what you want to do is get this wet so that the cotton ball is contacting the lead. Of course, you need that wet. You're going to need some paper towel. And now you want to dab this so it's really, really dry. So you're not getting any kind of water kind of dripping off of it. I usually dab it until it's barely coming off here. And you'll see what I mean. You don't want this to be really, really wet, because what will happen is it'll kind of blur your maker's mark. So that's probably good. So now it's time to plug this in. Make sure you know where your negative is. I usually keep it in my hand. Okay, so we're on. I've zoomed in a bit so you can watch this. So now I'm just going to start at one end and I'll just touch it. And you can hear this hiss. I don't know if you pick it up on the camera. Okay, and you can see it's turning black. So what I usually do is once I hear it, then I'll just start to move up and down the blade. And you can see it's kind of sticking to the blade here, which is what you want, because then you'll get a nice connection and you won't be fuzzy. And if it gets too wet, then just dab it. You'll notice it gets a little green. And you'll notice I'm not dragging it across. I just find that kind of smears it a little bit. I'm kind of tapping and moving. And I pay special attention to kind of the edges, especially on the shark here. It's got fins and stuff, just to make sure you don't miss the tips of the fins. Okay, that's pretty good. So what I'll tend to do, and this is why I tape one side, is I'll lift this up. And the best thing to do is to take a marking pen like this and just kind of feel. If you can feel the edge, that's pretty good. Okay, I think this is really good. So what some people do now, and I don't do this, and I'll explain why, is they will now reverse the leads. And you'll notice if I take this off, it's kind of black, but if I take some acetone, all the dark will come off. But if you reverse the leads, you will actually darken this quite a bit. And that's what a lot of people do, is to darken the interior of their Maker's Mark. Since mine is kind of big, if I sand it, I tend to take the center of the shark out, so it looks a little weird. So I don't like the dark. I like to kind of have it translucent kind of thing. I just like to have it embossed on the knife. So I don't like the dark aspect, so I take it off. But that looks really good. I'm happy with that. So that's the whole process. Now I'll just go over the blade and kind of sand it. First, I'll just take some acetone. Let's try that. I'll unplug this. Yeah, you'll see how the black is kind of coming off completely. Okay, that looks really good. Yeah, that looks good. It's a nice deep Maker's Mark. Okay, and then I'm just going to go over that with some sandpaper and take the little wispies out of the edge. But it looks good. Okay, that's all there is to it, folks. It's really simple. I cleaned up my stencil just with a bit of acetone, and you can see it's good as new, ready to use on the next knife. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you got something out of today's video. Remember, hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.